cacao, cacao, cacao. Hey yogi friends, welcome to today's tutorial on Bakasana or crow pose. What is Bakasana or crow pose? Let me give you a little bit of an example here. I'm going to plant my hands, lift my knees into the back of the elbows, gaze forward and lift my toes from the floor. Side on view, I'm coming from here, knees, toes, balance. And if I'm feeling really groovy, I'm going to lift here, shoot myself back and take a vinyasa. Inhale, uphail, that's a new one. And come back down to earth. Do I expect you to achieve all those things in the first go? No, I do not. However, Bakasana or crow pose is a wonderful pose for opening up the heart chakra. Anything that we do on our arms, our arm balances, downward facing dog, chaturanga, where we're actually using the strength of the body and right through this space here, has to do with the heart chakra. So it's about finding a little bit of self-love, compassion, courage, confidence, fearlessness, tenacity, application, strength, and one more thing, counterbalance. What is counterbalance? Counterbalance is something that you will need to uncover for you to find your crow. So what are some of the other things that we're going to look at in this tutorial? We're going to look at a little bit of arm stretching. Really important that we stretch and strengthen the arms as we move through this. Core is going to be super important so that you can find your stability in crow. So as you're working things like chaturanga, downward facing dog, and you're maybe doing some core work, some low boat, back up to Navasana, which we'll look at in a few minutes. All of these things are going to be super helpful when putting your crow pose together, all of those components linking in to create your first arm balance. One of the most important factors of this is around compassion to the self. So we're super close to the ground. So if you fall out of crow, you don't have that far to fall, which is really great news. But what you do have to look at is how are you speaking to yourself? If you fall out and you're, oh, damn it, I can't do this, or I'm no good at this, you need to look at the words that you're using and find that compassion and kindness within, the same compassion and kindness that you would exhibit or show to a friend that was facing a challenge or a family member. Indeed, you'd be encouraging them and supporting them along their journey. And those are the words that you need to find for yourself so that you can encourage that growth of self-love, compassion, kindness, confidence, fearlessness, courage, and the exploration of cacao, Bakasana, crow pose. So how are we going to get started? We're going to start with some wrist activities and some arm stretching. So the way to get moving into this shape is to do some vinyasa. So make sure that you've warmed up the body. Chaturanga, downward facing dog, maybe you've done some sun sals, maybe you've done some hip opening, wherever your yoga asana journey has taken you today. Let's play with the wrists. First of all, we're going to start with some rock of the 80s disco moves here. I'm just like wrapping my way through some wrist rolls, which is kind of fun. And see if you can go in the other direction. Doesn't always work for me. Interlacing the fingers and pressing the hands away from the mat. I am protracting the shoulder blades, which means I am creating space between the shoulder blades. This is retraction, squeezing the shoulder blades together, protraction, squeezing the shoulder blades away. And that is a shape that we will need to find in our crow pose. I'm going to take those interlaced fingers all the way up to the sky. And I'm going to drop my hand over to the right, take a little stretch through the side body, drop my hand over to the left, take a little stretch through the side body and come into tabletop. Now I've got both my hands planted and facing forward. I'm going to turn my fingertips back towards the knees, tuck the toes and sink my hips back towards my heels. So I'm really feeling a beautiful opening through the wrist here and up into the forearm. You can walk the hands a little closer to the knees and feel that lovely stretch. And I'm opening up into the toes too here as I've got the toes tucked and the hips going down to the heels. Coming back to tabletop, taking the hands out to the side and shifting the body weight, feeling a little bit of rock and roll here, turning the hands palms in, side to side. That feels pretty good. And then I'm going to try this tricky little one. So the front of the hand facing down to the mat this time. This is called a Palmyra Stretch. I don't know who Palmyra is or what they have to do with hands, but here we are. Again, dropping the hips back towards the heels, and this is a pretty intense stretch. What we want to do is feel the stretch, but we don't want to feel any sharp pain. So be mindful as you move through some of these stretches. I'm going to come back down to the earth here, sitting the hips on the heels. If you are anything like me, you ride a scooter, you've got a lot of this action happening, the grip around the handlebars. Perhaps it's the shopping trolley, maybe it's the steering wheel, perhaps it's even your digital device. Stretching into the fingers is a really beautiful gift to give yourself. Stretching here, maybe giving each finger a massage, working in the opposite direction. I can feel this all the way up into my forearm, feels really great. Maybe pressing the thumb into the center of the hand and giving that a go on the other side. So really stretching the fingers and giving them some loving care. When we've got our little gecko grip happening, which we will do in our Bakasana or crow pose, stretching into the hands can be a really lovely thing to do. Back to some rock of the 80s video disco rap moves and some traffic lights. This is a little bit Saturday Night Fever-ish. And let's get started with crow pose. What we want to do with our hands is spread our fingers as much as we can. So you can play with your grip on the floor and see if you can pull the fingers back towards the knuckles, kind of like a gecko grip. And I know if you've done the chaturanga workshop with me, I quite often talk and play with that gecko grip. So see if you can find that gecko grip as you play with pressing the fingers into the earth. So that's first port of call for Bakasana. We're then going to come into our Malasana or yogi squat. And I find this a really easy place to move from to find your first crow. So I'm just wriggling side to side here, and this is giving me a little bit of hip opening, playing with my hip mobility and also ankle and foot mobility, which is quite nice. You can find a little balance here in your Malasana. And a really beautiful way to practice Malasana, or hop out for just a moment, is if you have a wall, simply slide your body down the wall, walk your butt back and rest into the wall. Props are a beautiful thing as we move through our yoga practice, as it just allows you to see what might be possible. So possible here is me sitting in this yogi squat or Malasana with the back supported by the wall, which is it's actually a really lovely outcome. And my next top tip for moving into Malasana is actually to use a block. So pop this between the feet, and then you can simply drop the heels down. You can up level the block there so that you've got a little bit of support and move into your yogi squat. So without further ado, let's look at our Bakasana or crow pose as a shape. As we come down into our yogi squat, our Malasana, we're going to reach the hands forward, and essentially this is the kind of position that we're going to find. We're going to find ourselves squeezing into our bent elbows as we move into crow. So we want to reach as far forward as we can, shift up onto the toes, and I want to take my gaze forward, further forward than my fingertips, further forward than my mat. I'm going to lift my hips and shift my knees onto the back of my elbows and eventually lift my toes up off the earth. So you can see how far forward my gaze is and how far forward my shoulders are of my hands. If you are coming into Bakasana and you have the hands forward, but you're looking down towards the mat and wondering what your toes are going to do, look where my body's going. It makes this shape quite impossible. It makes it not so much fun anyway, because I'm gazing down at the mat and it just makes balancing that much harder. And when we look at counterbalance, we want to take the hands as far forward as we can, shift the body weight over the hands. The shoulders are forward of the fingertips, and then we can lift the toes. Where the eyes go, the body will flow, as we say in our yoga practice. So that counterbalance is a really essential element here of crow pose. So yes, there's strength. Yes, there's abdominal or core strength and upper body strength, but counterbalance and taking your weight a little bit further forward of the shoulders is a really essential element in being able to find your way into crow pose. So let's look at some core work. If we come from our Malasana, we can drop back down onto our hips, and I've got my hands out the front here, and I'm going to bend my elbows and squeeze my legs into my elbows. If I flex my feet, this is essentially my crow pose, but with a different gravitational forces happening here. So I can squeeze my knees into my elbows and get the feeling of what that's going to be like, because we want to have our elbows bent, so we've actually got somewhere to stack the knees. And you can even change this gravitational force slightly by rolling into the back, pressing the knees into the elbows and giving that a good squeeze. And you can even lift the shoulders up off the earth and back down. Lift the shoulders up off the earth and back down. Do that one more time. Lift the shoulders up off the earth and back down. And there you have your play in crow pose, rolling all the way back up and coming back into your yogi squat. So there are so many beautiful exercises that you can use for strengthening the core, such as plank pose, and you can use knee to the elbow, so you've got your shoulder protraction and you're activating the core, and you can step one foot forward, then the other, and drop into your Malasana, sinking the hips down to the earth, and we're replicating our Bakasana on the earth here, and we've got our half boat, and then we can come down to low boat, come back up to half boat, back down to low boat, back up to half boat, and we're mimicking our crow pose, down to low, up to half, and we're ready to go into Malasana. So I'm going to find a little bit of momentum and come back up to my yogi squat, and we're going to get ready to rock and roll into crow. So there are a couple of different things that you can do with the knees in crow pose. I'm going to reach my hands forward, plant the hands with that gecko grip onto the mat. You can see my knees are on the outside of my elbows. I want to keep my elbows bent as I lift up onto my toes, lift the hips, and squeeze my knees into the side of my arms and lift up. The next idea is that we reach forward, keep the elbows bent, and we create a little ledge on which we want the knees to sit. So that little ledge is created by the bent arm, and it's like my knees are going into the back of my tricep and just resting on the back of my elbow. Activation of the core, gaze forward, one knee lifts, and then the other. The third variation comes into crane pose, and this is where we start to work straight arms. So the journey to crane is bringing the knees into the armpits and lifting up through the straight arms, and that does require a little bit more strength and a little bit more flexibility in the shoulders and elbows. So it's all just part of the journey. Now, if you're really struggling to get your feet off the floor, I totally get it. There might be just that little bit of confidence and you just need a tiny little bit of a boost to get you over the line. We're going to use the block at the back of the feet. Let me show you how this is going to work. I want you to set the block between the feet and pop a squat over the top of the block. Reach the arms forward, but not too far forward. And we're going to shift the body weight and bring the weight onto the bent elbow. I'm looking back at my block and I'm going to tap the toes on top of the block. Take the gaze forward and start to feel the shift, and then I can lift the feet up off the block. So the block is really about gaining a little bit of confidence to find your way into crow. And it's a really great tool if you don't have somebody else to help you with alignment or shift you into that space if you're working by yourself. So to look at that again, the block is between my feet. I've reached forward, planted my spaced fingers, my gecko grip. Lift the hips, lift the heels, rock forward into that space. My right toe comes onto the block, my left toe comes onto the block, and I can practice staying here, and I can lift even just 1 foot at a time while I build a little bit of strength and confidence to lift up into my crow pose. So you might be asking, why do we even do crow pose? I know, courage, confidence, tenacity, strength, counterbalance, core strength, all of the above. But crow pose turns up in some crazy places in your yoga practice, and it can be just really super duper fun. Remember when you were a kid and you really didn't have any like, oh my God, someone's going to see me do this or that. You were all about kind of having this fearless exploration of your back garden and your house and being upside down and walking on your hands. And crow pose as adults is like a revisitation of some of those childhood activities. So it can really bring a smile to your face and be quite a joyous and fun place to be in. And sometimes, quite honestly, we get super serious with our yoga asana practice, and we just need to get out of that space and find a little bit more fun in this journey. And crow pose can be exactly like that. If you're a beginner yogi, this is an entry-level arm balance, and you might not get it on your first go, and that's perfectly okay. Take a break, come back. Crow pose will be here in 10 minutes after you've been through a few separate vinyasa or done a few different yoga shapes. You can always come back and play in crow pose. One of the reasons that I love teaching this shape to beginner yogis is watching people's faces as they go, I can't do that, I can't do that. And as you talk them through this journey, watching the elation spread over their faces as they find that first arm balance is one of the most rewarding things that I can experience as a teacher. So I strongly encourage you to move into this space and play with your crow. So crow can be popped in and amongst, say if you take a vinyasa, you can play with it in that space. As you advance your practice, I haven't got there yet, crow to handstand. I'm not sure that that's ever going to be a thing for me. It requires a certain amount of upper body strength that maybe I just haven't developed yet. But you can certainly practice and play with coming into eventually, as you find this strength in crow, bringing the head down to the earth and pressing up into headstand or tripod headstand, coming down, shooting back, finding a variation of chaturanga to Urdhva Mukha, or perhaps you can come from crow into a wide-legged forward fold and then move into tripod headstand. There are a whole raft of things that you can play with here in crow. The main thing is that you do play with it in crow and you do give it a go. So if this is your first entry or your first give it a go at crow Bakasana, I wish you luck. It's going to be super fun. So remember that compassion and kindness to the self. If you've got any questions, feel free to start a thread in the Facebook group. And that Facebook group is a place for support and encouragement. So if you post a video in there of maybe some of your successes, or maybe if it's even a blooper reel, so other people know that you're not the only one that's falling, that they're not the only ones that falling over. If you saw the first crow pose that I did, I actually did it it was probably only about 3.5 years ago, and my first crow pose was in the grass in my backyard. I had a yogashala in Port Hedland, but I didn't practice it in there. I was practicing it at home on the grass. And honestly, my butt was in the air, my leg was out to one side, and there's actually a photograph of me falling onto the side of my head coming out of crow pose. And honestly, it's quite a laugh when I look back and I think, look how far that particular shape has come, and I still find crow pose quite fun today. But the thing is, you're really close to the earth, so even if you fall out, it's just not going to hurt that much, really. So just give it a go anyway. Falling over is just finding your edge, so it's just going to teach you where you need to find that balance. Maybe you need to look at your counter, where am I looking, all of those sort of things. So crow pose, an excellent adventure, my yogi friends. Anyway, if you would like to shoot me a video, just in case you don't have anyone that is able to look at alignment or perhaps some adjustments or modifications for you, feel free to send me through a video. Either you can post that in the Facebook group or you can send that through to me on Messenger or on email, and I will happily have a look at that for you and shoot you any recommendations or modifications. You can always book in for a class with me and where you can work one-on-one here in person in Bali, or indeed on Zoom, or Facebook Messenger is always super easy too. But I'm always here to support you on this journey. So my yogi friends, happy crowing, happy Bakasana, and I will see you on the next tutorial. Namaste. Cacao, cacao.